Get ready, Staten Island.
The Ferry Hawks are back at SIUH Community Park July 7th to the 12th for a 6-game series against the High Point Rockers. Tonight, first pitch is at 6:30. It's Thirsty Thursday with $5 Bud and Bud Light Drafts. Friday, July 10th, first pitch is at 7 p.m. May the Force be with you on Star Wars Night with post-game kids glow around the bases with special lightsaber training packs.
Visit ferryhawks.com now to lock in your seats.
Traditional home security only alerts you after a break-in, and that's too late. SimpliSafe is changing that.
Stop. This is SimpliSafe. Police are on the way.
We don't just alert, we stop crime before it starts. SimpliSafe, plan starting around $1 a day. Save 50% on your new system with professional monitoring at simplisafe.com/Spotify or with promo code Spotify.
Outdoor deterrence requires a SimpliSafe Active Guard outdoor protection plan starting at $49.99 a month. Visit simplisafe.com/licenses for alarm license information. Tennessee 2012.
The sound of praise for your Sunday morning.
The only one who could ever teach me
Introducing Reverend A.R. Bernard of the Christian Cultural Center
was the son of a preacher man.
and Rabbi Joseph Potasnik of Religion on the Line.
The only one who could ever teach me.
Now, here's the Rev and the Rabbi, where faith matters.
Good morning. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
And our producer, Elias Raff, is with us as well, making this show audible for people around the country. Thank you, Elias, for all you do. Yeah. So, Rev, I was looking at that Declaration of Independence because last week, July 4th, and all of these signatures are there. None of them are notarized. So, I just wonder,
but
could it be?
You're the only one. The Protestants wouldn't pay attention to that. You'd have your eye
with
right
the legal
on there.
background that I have, sleuth that I am. Wait a minute. How do we know? Anyway, it'd be a great exercise for all. We talked last week about civic responsibility. Everyone should read the Declaration of Independence. Everyone should read the Constitution. Justice Breyer, whom you know, Justice Breyer carries a copy of the Constitution with him wherever he goes. So it looks at it, looks at it again.
Yeah. I have a copy of the Federalist Papers, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. I have all of our documents on my computer. I carry it with me. I look at it. But you know what? I don't know if they still have civic classes. Because remember, in civics, when we were in school, we reviewed these documents.
Yeah.
A lot of that has changed.
Responsibility, or at least civilian responsibility, was taken more seriously. You studied all of that. You realized that it wasn't just about learning about it. It was about living it. And I think, unfortunately, there are many people, again, we talk about the people who don't vote. It's interesting because I find the people who don't vote, they determine the outcome of the election, right? Because when you have 17% that votes and 83% that don't vote, it's the 83% that should be faulted for the result they don't like.
They allow it. I think that, there's a mixture of disillusionment, cynicism in this country. The history of the vote is very telling. Just do a study of voting in American history and how groups fought for the right to vote, whether it's women, African Americans, of course, you know that story. It's quite interesting, the importance of it. And we forget, we don't know the price that has been paid, especially with the civil rights movement. The people who were killed and beat and hung and brutalized for exercising their right to vote or even organizing. The vote is special. And then with the way things are set up with the Electoral College versus the popular vote, we're not sure who really makes the final decision. Is it the people or is it the Electoral College? And with the most recent, over the last 10 years, questioning of the voting system, now we're wondering, is our vote really counted? Does the system work?
Well,
whatever. We're in a pickle.
Whatever the questions are, it doesn't excuse one from not participating. You don't have a right to complain about the result if you don't participate.
I absolutely believe that
Just
100%.
by the way, there's also a lot of discussion about primaries. That first of all, you should have open primaries where everybody votes, not just the party, but everybody votes, and don't do it in the summertime. You know, do it in the,
Well, do they plan these things on purpose? When nobody is
yeah,
around
yeah, because
and only your constituents, people
yeah,
are on vacation, they're
yeah,
traveling.
and then a certain group comes out to vote. Those who are most enthusiastic, and the others who are, they're not as excited about voting, but they don't participate. And then you have
So
these candidates from the extremes. You have candidates from the DSA. One candidate 17% voted, and she won. So
yeah, it's telling, but I think the apathy, the cynicism about our voting system and voting process. When people get excited about the candidate, they come out.
yeah,
And there's
that's true.
excitement between parties. They come out, but when you're seeing problems on both sides, you start having a widening middle, and fortunately, part of that middle are those who become cynical and just don't vote.
Yeah, and how you reach the public has also changed, where social media becomes a very important method of reaching people, whereas in the past, the flyers and knocking on doors, that's all still part of it, but it doesn't have the impact of social media with young people in particular.
Yeah, and the speed with which information gets into the hands of people. Because in about the mid 1800s in this country, because I know it because of religious studies, um, the print media became very, very
Mm-hmm.
powerful in circulating information and influencing and shaping the culture, especially within the Protestant community. Religious pamphlets and booklets and flyers because of the Great Awakening, the first, but especially the Second Great Awakening. You had a lot of that going on and shaping public opinion.
And now you ask people, which papers do you read? And they say, I don't read the paper. I get everything online. Uh, so it's a whole different
Yeah,
approach.
and which paper do you read? You've got to
Yeah,
read four papers in order to make up your mind as
yeah.
to what you feel is valid. But young people, the millennials and Gen Zs, and again, it's where we are as a society. We want everything as entertainment. We want our politics as entertainment. We want our news as entertainment. We even want our religion as entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
There was this in BET, Black Entertainment Network. There's this comedian named Drewski, and he enters the program because he's the MC, suspended and flying down onto the stage, and this is a replication of what he did in January to make fun of these high profile preachers who make every service a spectacle.
Mm.
And they'll do one guy in Houston, Texas. He drives a motorcycle in onto the stage or another vehicle, and he crafts his sermon around the motorcycle.
Mm.
He one another guy. He's in a chair. He's in a chair, having someone give him a shave and a haircut while he's giving a sermon illustration.
Mm.
Yeah, it's gone out there, but it's becoming uh, so ridiculous
Yeah.
that even comedians are now picking up on it, making fun of it, and then they say, "Well, this is holy." I don't know about that. I don't know.
I think it's gimmickry, and
Exactly.
right, and many people think that the way to grab the attention of individuals is through gimmick. And that to me, well, look, I know you have to meet people where they are very often. That you don't want to use the same routine that hasn't worked in a number of years, but gimmickry is also short-lived.
Yeah,
It may be cute and clever a few times, but it's not sustaining.
and especially in a society that's obsessed with novelty, things get old really fast
Yeah,
in this
yeah.
society. We want something new. What's the next thing? You know what I mean? And that's problematic. I look. if that's what you've got to do to reach them, then where they are is a problem.
Yeah, that's
You
true.
know what I
It's
mean?
a good point. Yeah, yeah. So we're going to take a break, but when we come back, I want to ask you a question.
Just one?
Well, we begin with one, and then
Okay, we'll work our way out.
One leads to nine more, especially in the Jewish tradition. We are a people who question. I see stories where people who claim to be religious commit immoral or amoral acts. And I think to myself, well, how is it you're religious and you do that? And I remember asking a professor at rabbinical school, and he said, because some people look at one book, but they don't look at the other book. They don't read the prophets. They don't read books that concentrate on morality. They read on books that concentrate on ritual. So you could be ritualistic, not humanistic. And if you look at the commandments, they're integrated. They're both. You can't separate one from the other. To say I'm religious and to abuse people, that contradicts what religion is all about.
Well, isn't that a tension?
So I want to talk to you about that.
Right. Yeah, we call it a tension between orthodoxy and orthopraxy, doctrine and practice. Yeah. So we're going to take a break. We'll be back with more of the Rev and the Rabbi right here on your Sunday morning, right here, Red Apple Radio Networks.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi.
My fellow Americans, if you think you know politics, think again. I'm Michael Cohen, and every week on When You Know, we're pulling back the curtain on power, politics, media, and the people making headlines. On my new WABC radio show, you'll hear conversations from names that you know. People like Jerry Falwell Jr., Anthony Scaramucci, Alan Dershowitz, and many, many more. Maybe, just maybe, we'll even hear from the president. No scripts, no spin, just real conversations with people who were in the room where it happened. And trust me, we've got some very big surprises coming. Look, I've spent years at the center of politics, controversy, and power. I know the players, I know the stories, and now I'm bringing you inside. When You Know, Sundays at 5 p.m. on WABC Radio. And When You Know Unleashed, wherever you get your podcasts. Because with me, you never know who's going to show up.
The most memorable gifts aren't found, they're made. Zazzle is a custom marketplace where you pick any product, a mug, a card, a tote, a phone case, and make it personal. A photo, a name, an inside joke. The kind of gift that actually fits the person. That's what 30 million customers have been coming back to Zazzle for over 20 years to find. Right now, save 25% on your first order at Zazzle.com. That's Zazzle.com. Make it zamazing.
Where faith matters. The Rev and the Rabbi.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
All right, Rev, we're talking about separation between belief and behavior. Right? There are people who have a set of beliefs, but the behavior doesn't parallel many of those beliefs. So,
well, you have a term, and we have a term, right? You and I have had conversations, right? And you'd say, well, he or she is a practicing Jew.
Mm-hmm.
The moment we add the word practicing to it, we're making a distinction between someone who claims an identity, but they're not necessarily practicing that faith. And I think that kind of zeroes in on it. So what do we call the other side? Cultural Jew? I'm born into it.
Well, but there are people who practice. There are people who sincerely practice their faith, practice Judaism, and synthesize both. I mean, they're respectful of others and they have reverence for God, and it's all together. But there are those who somehow have this dichotomy where one is followed and the other is not. It's interesting. I mentioned to you during the break that if you look at the Ten Commandments, honoring your parents is on the same side as keeping the Sabbath. Why?
Mm-hmm.
Because how you treat the other, in this case your parents, is very important. Don't say I keep the Sabbath, but I'm abusive to my parents. That's not being religious. That's claiming to be religious, but it's not being religious. And we say you need both. You can't just have one without the other.
Well, I'm trying to remember whether Prophet Amos or Hosea, I think it was Amos, who said that I desire mercy and not sacrifice.
Micah.
God speaking to them. Micah, okay. Yeah. God speaking to them. Say, thank you. I appreciate that. And why? Why would he even bring that up? Why would the prophet present that, they were busy in ritualism, and yet they were not exercising issues of mercy and justice and concern about the individual. I think that statement kind of captures it because, like I said before the break, we have orthodoxy versus orthopraxis, doctrine versus practice. So when you have orthodoxy, rules and regulations and whatnot, it produces religious formalism, legalism, but it also produces hypocrisy. You know what I mean? Because you can claim this high standard, but when it comes to seeing it in your life, it's a different story. Your values shift. So it's tough because think about this, Rabbi. We are moral agents, you and I, in the world. We bring a moral value consensus because of religious faith, right? And most religions, and not all, but most religions have a moral standard. And we bring that to society. But it's also the ideal that we bring to society. This is the way things ought to be. This is the way people should live. But then there's a conflict between the ideal and the reality. This is the way it ought to be, but this is the way people actually live. And we have to call that into question. And it's a tension because even we ourselves can't live up to the ideal.
You and I have spoken about windows in houses of worship because what you say on the inside, you got to see on the outside. So the window is there to remind you of that. But I think back growing up, my dad was in retail, in the grocery business. And I remember clearly as a kid in the store, he had a Bible near the scale, right? And it was a reminder that just weights are very much a part of religious tradition. It's not just about keeping kosher, it's about being kosher in the behavior, that both are integrated. And it always bothers me when I see people who separate. Now, look, we all sometimes fall from the standard. We all don't reach where we need to reach, but that's why people are called out on it. But don't justify one and neglect. Don't justify religion or religious behavior when you're not fulfilling some of the essentials. I mean, if you're abusive to a neighbor, don't tell me, well, I go to services every week. That doesn't cut it. And I think some people fall into that, that kind of confusion or that kind of, delusion, where they think by doing one, you're okay. You don't have to worry about the other. Remember years ago, they used to say about some of the underworld figures, well, he was good to his mom. Being good to your mom doesn't give you this kind of, permission to go and commit some of the crimes.
Yeah. You bring up a tension here when it comes to practicing faith and the standards of our faith, the ideals of our faith, and putting it into practice in the real world. We're in a very, very divided political climate here in America for the last, has to be about 10 years especially. But we as Christians, we are in a crisis here. Of course, that there's a lot of evangelical support around the present administration and President as he has identified and, played to that constituency, Trump. And it puts us in a place we, like for instance, love your enemies,
that's, by the way, that's not our tradition.
And I know,
that's yours.
That's a different story. Eye for an eye. But, love your enemies, right? But publicly, we celebrate humiliating people who disagree with us, people who challenge us. You know, we hear for us. You know, and this is coming out of the Beatitudes. You know, bless other peacemakers, but we reward outrage and conflict in our society. You know, we talk about, you know, Jesus says, you know, care for the least of these, the marginalized within society, care for the stranger. And that's something that you do share.
We
share
it many
in terms of
times.
doctrine.
It is
Care
mentioned
for the stranger.
It is
Yeah.
numerous times it's mentioned in the Bible.
But
Because you were
we
strangers.
speak
care for the
of
stranger.
immigrants. Yeah, but we speak of immigrants only as threats. You know,
Right.
how do we reconcile these contradictions? That's the challenge that we're in right now.
Yeah. And I think, you know, sometimes I find that there are people, because they're supporting a particular candidate, the support comes with a wholesale justification or a wholesale embrace. You know, they don't separate. Well, the person said something that's inappropriate. This person did something that's wrong. Well, you have a responsibility to call it out. No, I like that candidate. He's my candidate. You know, I like his policy.
Exactly. So we excuse it.
Yeah.
You know, we can go on and on with the list, but I think about the sanctity of life because these are big issues, you know, around within certain voting blocks. You know, so we talk about the unborn, and yet we are indifferent when it comes to poverty, healthcare, you know, life beyond the womb. And I'm very strong in terms of my commitment to the sanctity of life. You know, but we forget about all of the other issues. Once a person comes out of the womb and has to struggle through society, we become indifferent to them. That's
the
a problem.
image of God begins to be spelled with lower cases, getting smaller and smaller till you can't see it. Yeah. All right, we're going to come back. You said something to me the other day as you and I were talking to each other we talked about hatred. We're always talking about hatred, it seems, and how it's become part of the mainstream. You know,
and how do we deal with hatred? Because
look at
know,
anti-Semitism.
We've had guests, and they, all right. Let's deal with anti-Semitism. All right,
you got it.
So we'll be back with more of the Rev and the Rabbi right here on Red Apple Radio Networks.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, the Rev and the Rabbi.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Reverend, I look at the statistics on hatred, and anti-Semitism leads the list, far away from all of the others. Not that the lower numbers don't mean it's acceptable, but anti-Semitism seems to be out of control. And I think back, we have what's called the 3 weeks. We're in the midst of the 3 weeks between the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, commemorating the destruction of the temple. And why do we have this 3 week period? Because it started with a crack in the wall, a breach of the wall. And then there was the deterioration, in terms of respect, and ultimately a destruction of the temple, which means that it all starts with a crack, whether it's a wise crack, whether it's some kind of hurtful statement, it's a put down, but it escalates. And you have hate crimes. And it's just, look at where we are today, where anti-Semitism is out there, out of control. And for many, it's acceptable. You can say the worst things about Jews and get away with it.
I will tell you, and I'd put it in a larger context. It's just a problem that we have with the other, whether it's racism, anti-Semitism, religious bigotry. It's this problem that we have with anyone that's not like us, and it's like we want everyone to conform to us. One of the things that I appreciate in the Jewish community, and we had one guest who talked about it, one rabbi, it's Jake Novak, right? And two things, in fact, now that we think about him, I want to bring up two things in our conversation with him. But one of the things that he mentioned is that Jews are not taught to proselyte. So proselytizing is not part of what you do. If people inquire, you do, bring them in.
Right.
But in the Christian evangelical, in fact, the whole idea of evangelical is spreading the word and converting people, to the faith. And that creates a tension when you're in a society and you're the minority in that society, or even if you're the majority in that society and you're demanding that everybody conform to that faith or its values or its practices, and that's a tension here in the United States that we have right now. So it's about the other. And if you
Yeah.
study American history, we have gone through problems with the other. But what I really want to focus in on is the solution. Is the solution law and order? Because if you speak to some people, and they fall on different places of the political spectrum, but that term seems to be a panacea for whatever ails society in terms of society's violence and crime and corruption. And I think that's a problem, that law and order is important. I agree that law and order matter. A society
Right.
that cannot enforce its laws can't protect its citizens. So when you think about anti-Semitic violence, harassment, vandalism, threats, and intimidation, it should be prosecuted swiftly and consistently. And I believe the government, this is my faith, government has a God-given responsibility to restrain evil and protect the innocent. But I think it's more
Yeah.
than just law and
I
order.
agree. Law and order is
restrains
not going to
evil.
eradicate anti-Semitism
No,
or any other form of
because
hatred.
yeah, we need just laws that restrain evil, but we need just institutions that administer those laws impartially. Because what happens, there's inequity in how the law is applied. We also need virtuous citizens, individuals whose character makes coercion less necessary.
Yeah, you need
Because if
role
it's
models.
Yes, you need people. So it's
Yeah.
not just like, okay, let's beef up the law. Look, law ended slavery, but it didn't get rid of racism.
Yeah.
Racism persisted.
Exactly.
Even with the change in laws and amendments to the Constitution, racism persisted. So it's not a one size fits all answer to what ails our society. And yet there are people who say, yeah, that's it. We need law and
Look,
order.
I hear people say education, Holocaust education, and I think it's essential. People should know the history of pain of other people. But in many cases, it doesn't transform the individual. We have people who, they go through it, they go through the motions, they go to the courses, sensitivity training, and they come out and they still have the same hardcore feelings against the other.
Yeah.
So what is it? What are they getting at home? What are they seeing at home? What are they hearing on social media? There's a whole lot of factors that go into the development of a persona. And
exactly. It is not just enforcing the law. Just laws, just institutions, virtuous citizens. Those are three pillars that we need. And virtuous citizenship comes from the home, the family, the educational system, as well as houses of worship. Those are the moral legs of our society.
you mentioned
So it's
earlier,
not a one size fits all. Go ahead.
You
I'm
mentioned
sorry.
something before, which I wanted to pick up on in terms of proselytizing the other. For years, we would have a great challenge here, not only in New York, but around the country, with an organization called Jews for Jesus. And there, right?
You're talking about people I know. I know these people.
and their incentive was to go out there and to convince Jews that you could be this hybrid. You could be both Jewish, following the tenets of your faith, and at the same time embracing Jesus. And I said to someone once, well, how about Christians without Christ? Could we do that? How's that going to work for you?
That's a good answer. I like that.
No, but it's just I just feel that why do you have to change why? Leave me alone. We are 1/10 of 1% of the world's population. Leave us alone. We have enough to deal with. Here without people saying, no, you gotta believe this as well.
That's the idea of evangelism. The word evangel is a messenger. It's someone who spreads the good news. And Jesus did say that. He didn't say impose it. He didn't say perform spiritual muggings. That's not what he said. we have a responsibility to share that good news, and people respond.
Well, share it. Talk about sharing and imposing,
but
or trying to.
you're talking about the Messianic Jewish community,
Yeah,
and that's how they
exactly.
identify. They call themselves Messianic Jews because they've embraced Jesus as the promised Messiah of the Jewish people. So they consider themselves complete Jews, and you are incomplete.
Yeah, no, I used to have this. I once had that argument with Falwell. I said, "Do you think I'm walking on the wrong path?" He said, "Yes, yes. You until you embrace Christ, you are." So it's just. And by the way, very often their target audience are the vulnerable, those who are not steadfast in their faith. I often said the best answer to choose for Jesus is be strong as Jews. Then they have nothing to sell you because you're committed to your faith. But when you're weak, then, you listen to everything, and this may appeal, that may not appeal. Anyway.
Let me say this, because this is important, especially as we talked about anti-Semitism. When you think about the history, right, anti-Semitism has survived monarchies, democracies, communist regimes, fascist regimes, booming, highly flourishing societies, and even impoverished societies. And that tells us something, very profound, I think, that it has a remarkable adaptability because it feeds on fear, resentment, ignorance, and the human tendency to create scapegoats. And that's what's been piled on. So it doesn't matter what society, what context you've been in, you continue to have that problem. And I think more so because it's easy to point to someone, they're the problem.
Right.
They're the scapegoat. You and I did interviews on television about this.
Right.
New York One, we did an interview talking about the other and scapegoat.
And who was the other? Yeah. But, I was having this discussion with a rabbi recently who said, look, we've survived. I said, we may have survived, but look at the price we paid. Look at the suffering that we endured. So, if all you're talking about is survival and you think that's the standard of success, that's your decision. But I look at surviving at what cost? You're losing people, you're losing lives. There's deep pain. So it's got to be more than just surviving.
Yeah, and whether it's anti-Semitism or racism, I know we got to go to a break, but when we come back, I want to talk about, let's talk about some answers, because I think we are a place where we need to have answers. So we'll be back with more of the Rev and the Rabbi right here on Red Apple Radio Networks.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, the Rev and the Rabbi. Where faith matters, the Rev and the Rabbi.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Rev, by the way, before we continue, we got to extend a mazel tov to the happy couple, Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce, married the other day.
Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift Kelce. Now,
wow. Is that catered, by the way?
Hollywood.
Elias, does that get catered? How's that all work?
He wants to know who the caterer is. He wants to know who the caterer is.
Is it kosher? Yeah, well, it's a Friday night, so they don't have to worry about the kashrut on that one. Anyway, let's go back to responding to hatred, responding to anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
I feel,
as I said, go ahead.
My feeling has always been Jews alone cannot confront anti-Semitism. It has to be a collective response.
Absolutely.
Need non-Jews. Just as racism, victims of race, African Americans cannot alone, confront it. You need allies.
That's right.
And
you need friends.
Right.
Yep.
I very much, the rabbis, there were 700 rabbis who signed a letter, condemning the language Meir Mamdani used and calling people monsters who support AIPAC or by extension Israel. And I'm very happy with that, except signing a letter alone, I don't think will solve the problem. But signing a letter and other people standing with you of different faiths, that has a different impact. Right? You have to hear from
It-
others. You have to say, wait a minute, this is not just a Jewish issue. This is a people issue because, to me, today it's anti-Semitism, tomorrow it's racism and all of that. And I think we need to have that stronger defense system where we combat the other by cooperating with one another.
It's interesting because almost every broadcast, and I understand and appreciate this about you. You weave into the conversation the issue of your Jewish identity and the lived experience. And if you do that, as a person of color, if I weave into it the issue of race, you know, I I would get condemned for playing the race card every time, or talking too much about race. And can't we be colorblind? That's a whole nother conversation. But when it comes to the Jew, is there this
Yeah, no, we hear.
pushback and saying,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah,
the Jews,
it's the
Jews,
Holocaust. You're always mentioning the
yeah,
Holocaust. You're always mentioning,
exactly.
the
So you do
pogroms.
get
You're
that.
always mentioning the attacks on you. Yeah,
Yeah,
we get that.
yeah, yeah. But
People.
if you don't keep it going, it dissolves
Well,
into history, and the issues continue. In fact, they get worse if you don't
there's a way to stop.
say
There's a way to
anything.
get us to stop talking about it. Eradicate it.
Stop,
Right?
stop
Stop it.
doing it. Stop doing it. All right. So,
I would be
how do-
happy not to have to mention anti-Semitism week after week. Be great. But in the meantime, it's growing. We can't close our eyes
and
to
let me,
it.
and to our conversation, it has to be a multidimensional approach. And let me just say up front, enforce the law without hesitation. I believe in law and order 100%. I would not be involved with the police department doing what I'm doing if I did not believe that, in fact, we need more funding. Talk about defunding the police. We need more funding, right? But enforce the law without hesitation. But also, you got to condemn anti Semitism without political favoritism, whether it appears on the far right or the far left or in
100%.
religious extremism. You've got to do that. You and I have talked about education, the role of education, but it has to be truthful education, because there's some education out there that denies the Holocaust ever happened. So it has to be truthful education and dealing with myths. But here's something that you and I, of course, because of our vocation, right? We have to cultivate the moral imagination of our society. That comes through families, schools, and faith communities, houses of worship. In that passage that we look at often, where the earth is filled with violence,
Mhm.
Hamas, right?
Right.
And that's all kinds of violence, oppression and
Yeah.
et cetera. But it
And
also
verbal
says,
violence. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But it also says in that text, and the imaginations of men's heart became evil continually. Wow. Wow. It is not just when we think of imagination, we think of creativity, right?
Mhm.
No. But in that context, it's speaking of what comes out of the human mind, the values, the beliefs, the standards, you know what I mean? The morality, the moral imagination became corrupted. And if we don't shape the moral imagination, cultivate the moral imagination in our society, we're going to continue to see the
Well,
kind of violence and anti-Semitism and racism that we're experiencing.
that's why if all you do is teach slavery as another history lesson, Holocaust as another history lesson, and you don't delve into the moral questions that need to be raised, what's the beneficial impact of those kinds? It's another story. It doesn't touch the soul. It doesn't touch the imagination. And I think when we
Mhm.
talk about education, it's a moral education we need. We need people to be critical thinkers and say, how is it possible Germany, with all of its culture, all of its academic standing, could devolve into that kind of diabolical society? How is it America, with Declaration of Independence and Constitution, how is it could somehow condone slavery? Where is
Yeah,
the
yeah.
morality has to be challenged in that? And that we don't do
And
often enough.
Yeah, and that's why we've had all kinds of movements throughout American history to challenge the morality of these things. But Dr. King challenged America on a moral basis. It changed the conversation. It wasn't just about political or civic participation. No, this was a moral issue that he brought. And same is true for anti-Semitism because it's not merely a criminal problem. If it was just a criminal problem, yeah, beef up law and order. But it's moral, it's cultural, and it's even spiritual. So when we think about the imagination of a society, we're talking about the moral imagination of society. What is it producing? And if it's producing the wrong things, then we've got to change that imagination.
I have a number of conversations with someone we've had on the air and become a good friend, Alicia Wiesel, the son of Elie Wiesel. And his father was one who spoke about racism and, of course, spoke about anti-Semitism and often would talk about the sin of silence, being a society of onlookers, that we could look at that and do nothing about it. There was no moral component. You know, how does one close one's eyes to despicable acts and then go on and have a barbecue? I mean, how do you do that? How do you go to sleep at night knowing that people are being tortured, people are being treated in the most hateful fashion, inhuman, and yet you go back to the routine. They looked at the New York Times during the Holocaust, and there were some stories on different pages, but all the barbecues went on. There were sales in stores, life, and we can do that today too. Look at all of the pain in the world, and we just go on to the next. What's the score? Oh, that team won. Good. That becomes our focus rather than spending more time saying, why are we not raising our voices? Why are we committing the sin of silence? So we as faith leaders,
what you're talking, yeah.
No, we have that responsibility to remind people, but it's we can remind it. We've only negotiated 50% of the deal. Now we need the other 50% to follow through. Yeah.
We had a graduation with our NSBT, our seminary, and I was a commencement speaker for it. And I talked about what happens to a society when violence, corruption is normalized. We become so desensitized, and a society can progress technologically. It can continue to grow and develop while experiencing inner decay. And that's what happens. When it becomes normalized, we're in trouble. I know we're running out of time, but you and I share a biblical vision, right?
Right.
And the biblical vision holds together that government restrains evil, society cultivates virtue, and faith transforms the heart, right?
Right.
And only when these three work in concert do we have the best hope of confronting this kind of persistent evil, whether it's racism, anti-Semitism, or any other ism that denies the dignity of the human person. But when a society is not cultivating virtue, it's cultivating violence, it's cultivating disagreement and corruption, and hatred. That society is sick. There's a problem within that society, and it needs to pause and take a look at itself. And I think we are there in America.
I just want to conclude the 1790. It was George Washington who wrote the famous letter to the Touro Synagogue, and speaking about the welcome to the Jews in America, he said, the government of the United States gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance. And I think we have to remember those words, that we as citizens have to make sure that persecution and bigotry don't become mainstream. And therefore, we can't simply turn our backs and say there's nothing we can do. We have to ask, what more can we do? What else can we do?
Yeah, I will tell you, this is great. We're running out of time, but it's a great conversation. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation today. We love just walking through these things and thinking about them out loud in conversation and having you our audience to think about them. Very good, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We have to change the world. First, change your block where you live. Clean up your room, clean up the block. Eventually, more people do it, will change the world. Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for joining us today on the Rev and the Rabbi, right here on Red Apple Radio Network. Till next time, God bless.